In the 1944 play No Exit, written by the French existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre, Garcin, one of the main characters, makes the bold claim that hell is other people. This is one of Sartre's most well-known ideas, but what exactly is it saying? Does it mean that we should condemn ourselves to a life of solitude and withdraw completely from society? Is it saying that all human relationships are inherently doomed to conflict? Is there any hope for us? To properly understand Sartre here, we need to introduce the concept of the other and why there seems to be a conflict inherent in the relationship between an individual and the other. On a basic level, the other can be thought of as the experience of another free subject that inhabits the same world that we do. So we think that the world is ours, we project our own meaning and values onto it. However, the other is when we become aware that the world is not our own. We are not a consciousness all alone in a world full of mindless objects. Instead, there is another free subject with their own conscious experience. This free subject, the other, also makes the world their own. Thus, the world is no longer ours as we thought previously. Sartre writes that the other has stolen the world from me. Everything is in place, everything still exists for me, but everything is traversed by an invisible flight and fixed in the direction of a new object. The other's presence subverts our world and we lose a degree of control over it. The look or the gaze that the other exerts over us is just as unsettling, as it makes us realise that we are merely an object, a bodily presence in the other's world. We are no longer a pure subject as we thought previously. We are no longer at the origin of our world, but are instead reduced to the level of an object, or a mere appearance to the other. In other words, the other's gaze denies us our own subjectivity. It limits our freedom. But in order to regain our own subjectivity and reclaim the world as our own, must we not do the same to the other? Must we not make them objects in a similar way and deny them their subjectivity? So it would appear that we are thus condemned to a metaphysical struggle in which any victory we have is only temporary. This is because the other is engaged in their very own struggle to regain their own being, which they have lost through their interaction with us. Now we can perhaps understand better the meaning of the phrase, hell is other people. What is really meant here is that hell is the fact that we are unable to ever escape the watchful gaze of others. We are entrapped by the judgments of others and are reduced to mere object in their presence. Our own subjectivity, our very essence, the thing that is closest to us, is denied to us. Our existence as a conscious being becomes weak and fragile. When we are made into object by the other's gaze, we judge ourselves as an object, for it is as an object that we appear to another. We judge ourselves based on their standards, based on how they perceive us. This rather pessimistic interpretation has some truth to it, but later we'll be able to reconcile this and clarify that not all relationships are doomed as they may initially appear to be. Upon closer inspection, we can see that the look performs the same role that language does. Both the look and language function to reduce, conceptualize and categorize what is being perceived. In our case, it is reducing and conceptualizing a fully alive and conscious being into a mere object in our present experience. This, again, is where the conflict arises. Both the look and language, then, can be seen to be inherently violent, as they reduce and objectify the person. A kind of abyss forms between man and the other, as they are prevented from ever fully understanding each other in their entirety and their complexity, for each of them are always in constant tension. Slovenian philosopher Slavoj Žižek, in his book Violence, also reinstates the claim that language is inherently violent. It objectifies and prevents us from directly relating to others as fully conscious beings. He also writes on the inherently traumatic violence inherent in the look. Even in the context of love, the look of love is something that can even be traumatic to us. He writes, "It is for this reason that finding oneself in the position of the beloved is so violent, traumatic even. Being loved makes me feel directly the gap between what I am as a determinate being and the unfathomable X in me, which causes love. So, from our own point of view, we understand ourselves as a determined being. We know who we are, we know what we like, we know what we don't like, and so on. We are fairly confident that we know ourselves in our entirety. However, when we find ourselves in the position of the beloved, we become aware that there is some unknown part of us that causes this love in another. We are no longer certain about who we are, and this is typically an uncomfortable or disturbing situation to be in, as we feel almost alienated from ourselves, as if we don't truly know who we are. French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan thought that reality was split into three parts: the real, the symbolic, and the imaginary. The symbolic dimension of reality is what Lacan actually refers to as the big other. This is, in Žižek's words, the invisible order that structures our experience of reality, the complex network of rules and meanings which make us see what we see as the way we see it. It is the symbolic order, society's unwritten constitution. The symbolic space acts like a yardstick against which I can measure or judge myself. Everything we do, we always think to ourselves, what would the big other think? How would they view my actions? Everything that I desire and pursue is influenced by how I think the big other would react. The big other structures the very way that we think and go about in the world. This big other can be many things, from God to society to the state, and as we shall soon see in the case of feminism, it can be the patriarchy or the male gaze that is pervasive in society. So as we can see, this Lacanian idea of the big other has very close similarities with the Sartrean gaze. But it tells us that the look doesn't necessarily have to be directly from a person, from an individual. It has more to do with how we constantly perceive or feel ourselves to be watched. Simone de Beauvoir, the 20th century feminist philosopher, explores this idea in her book, The Second Sex, where she writes how the male gaze is pervasive throughout society, and it is something frightening for women and can even induce forms of paranoia and fear in young women. She writes, "The young girl feels that her body is getting away from her. On the street, men follow her with their eyes and comment on her anatomy. She would like to be invisible. It frightens her to become flesh and to show flesh." De Beauvoir was close friends with Sartre, and it shows in their philosophy. We see that the male gaze reduces women to objects, and women are made to feel shame at the fact that they appear to the male other only as flesh. They feel as if they are not recognised for any of their uniqueness. Their personal desires or passions or goals that they have in the world are not seen. They feel as if they are only seen as flesh and nothing more. Representation of women in media and film and in social media show that their looks are a form of social currency, and so they place more attention on their appearance. They focus more on how they look and less on how they feel. In other words, they have internalized the male gaze. The patriarchal society, or the big other in this case, imposes a hostile and oppressive meaning onto many of the uniquely female experiences that women go through. For example, according to Beauvoir, the experiences of menstruation, of pregnancy and menopause do not have any inherently bad meaning in them. However, she writes that the patriarchal nature of society views these natural processes as something that they should hide and that they should be ashamed of. Moreover, the male gaze sets the standard for what a woman should be. For example, they should be pure, they should be beautiful, that is, appealing to the male gaze. They should be feminine. Women are raised to adhere to this arbitrary standard set by the male big other. They are raised to become a true woman, that is, what man thinks woman should be. This is why de Beauvoir writes that one is not born, but rather becomes woman. The idea of the big other restricting freedom is also reinforced by Heidegger's view that the dominance of the they forces us to give up our freedoms, so that we live in a way that conforms with the expectations of the big other and the standards that it has imposed onto us. He writes that under a dominance of the they, everyone is other and no one is himself. We are always trying to conform to societal expectations and live in a way that is socially acceptable. It's almost impossible to authentically be ourselves, as From birth, we are constantly being moulded in a way to conform to the expectations of the big other. Now, so far, a fairly bleak picture has been painted with regards to the other, but can we reconcile this conflict that seems almost inescapable? Sartre thinks so. His phrase, hell is other people, is easily misunderstood, and he later clarified that it does not condemn all human relationships to failure. He said that if relationships with someone else are twisted, corrupted, then that other person can only be hell. But what we need to understand here is the phrase, hell is other people, is implicitly conditional. Only if our relationships with other people are bad and we are too dependent on the judgments of others, only then is hell other people. The judgments aren't inherently bad, but when we become overly dependent on them, internalise them and let them define us, that is when other people become hell to us. The often overlooked flip side of hell is other people is that heaven is each other. Hell is separateness, it is categorising and objectifying others. Hell is incommunicability, it is a lust for power, for domination, for riches and for fame. Heaven, on the other hand, is when we unite in shared goals, when we truly care about our fellow human beings, when we view them, as Kant would say, not as a means, but as an end in and of themselves. Thank you very much for watching. If you found the video useful in any way, be sure to leave a like, and if you're interested in going deeper into philosophy, then be sure to subscribe. Thanks again, and goodbye.